In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about mixing ink and the different modifiers that you can add to your ink, and also how to test inks on some paper before you start printing your final prints. So let's see, a couple of the supplies that I have here. I've got my ink here, and I'm using the Speedball acrylic ink for paper. You can also use fabric ink if you wanted, but for these projects that we're doing in this class, we're going to stick to just the paper ink. I have my gloss acrylic overprint varnish. This stuff, if you add it to your ink, will make it a little bit glossier and sort of give it like a nice sheen. You can also print a layer of this over top of your finished print if you want your prints to sort of like I said, have a nice glossy sheen to them. So this is some gloss acrylic overprint varnish. Here we have some extender base. I add this to most of my inks that I use. The extender base helps extend the pigment in your ink and prevents it from staining your screen as much. Plus, if you have a runnier ink, it helps give it a little bit more thickness, so it doesn't splooge out a lot when you're printing. Some of the darker colors can be a little waterier, if that's a word. So this helps give it a little bit more tack and is a little easier to work with. And then finally, I have transparent base, and this does what the name says it does, which makes your ink less opaque or more transparent. So you want to add this to your ink if you want to have transparent layers and stuff. I have 3 little containers here, and I'm going to show you guys 3 different options using the 3 different bases here and how those different options look when printed on paper. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by just adding extender base to this first cup here. And when you're adding extender base, you can add I don't know, I usually add about 30-ish%. It's an arbitrary measurement, but I add a little bit of this and then mix it with my ink. So let's see here. So if you can see that, that's about, I don't know, about 30% of my little container. You don't need to add a whole bunch. You can add, I don't know, up to 50% extender base, and that should be fine. But I usually add about, like I said, 30%. So this looks like a good amount. So then I'm gonna just be adding my ink to my extender base. I'm just using peacock blue for right now, but if you want to mix different colors, you guys probably know how to mix colors. You can use primary colors and mix whatever color you want, but for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and use peacock blue, and I'm gonna add, I don't know, maybe to the rest of the container full, maybe a little less, I don't know. As you can see here, I've got just a bit of ink versus extender base, and this honestly will still probably print pretty opaque. I come to find that the acrylic based inks are already a little bit more transparent, I think, than oil based. But this is as much ink that I'm adding to my extender base. And then I'm just using a little spatula here to just mix it up. All of the extender base and ink have been thoroughly mixed together, and then I'm going to go ahead and test on my paper. There's a couple of different ways to test this. You can have just a blank piece of paper here. I'm just using a scrap piece of copier paper. Doesn't really matter. You don't have to waste your nice paper on this. And you can test your ink by using just your spatula here and just by swiping a really thin layer across your paper to kind of see what the color looks like. So this is what the ink looks like if I just use my spatula and swipe it across my paper. You can also use a tiny screen, or you can use one of your guys' screens at home if you have, because I know that I told you guys to get 2 screens, so you can use your like empty screen or whatever. So I have like this little tiny screen that's specifically for ink mixing and stuff and testing colors. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this and pull kind of like a little print onto my paper, and pulling the ink through the screen is going to give you a little bit of a more accurate, what is it? It's gonna look more accurate because like you're actually pulling the ink through a screen as you would if you were going to print it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my screen here. I've got just a little piece of like cardboard or like chipboard that I cut down into a little chip, and I'm going to take some of my ink and I'm just going to draw it through my screen. As you can see there, in comparison to the swipe down with the spatula, it's super like, you know, opaque and thick. So if you want a more accurate representation of what your color is going to print like, I suggest swiping it through your screen with just, like I said, like a little piece of cardboard or something, just to sort of test it. And especially in this like reduction project that we're doing first, it is pretty smart to test your colors out before you start printing them. So yeah, so you'll get a more accurate depiction if you swipe it through your screen. The next ink batch that I'm going to make is going to have the gloss acrylic overprint varnish in it. So I'm going to add probably just about the same amount of like this as I did with the extender base. So I'm going to glob out a decent amount. Yeah. Okay, that's cute. And there. It's about 30%-ish. I don't even know. I'm not very good with fractions, but that's okay. So it's a little bit of the gloss over print varnish. And like I said, you can really put the gloss over top of your prints if you really want them to shine a lot. But I added about like, I don't know, like I said, like 30-ish% to my little cup. And then again, I'm going to just add my pigment. I've got just a little bit of pigment in comparison to my gloss varnish, and I'm gonna go ahead and mix these guys up. So I've got my varnish mixed in with my ink, and I'm gonna go ahead and test it on my paper by swiping it with my spatula first. So again, this is what it looks like with the spatula swipe. And now I'm gonna pull it through my tiny screen here. So this is what it looks like when I pulled it through my screen. It doesn't look too much different, I don't think. I don't know, I guess it's a little glossier. But I'm assuming that when it dries though, it'll dry a little bit shinier, but it looks relatively similar to the first pull that I did with the extender base. But yeah, so that's what the gloss overprint varnish looks like when you add it to your ink. Okay, and for my last color that I'm going to be mixing here for my last batch of ink, I'm going to try to make a pretty transparent blue. So I'm going to be using some transparent base. And with this stuff, you want to add more transparent base than you do ink because, well, most of the bases that I've already showed, I've added more base than ink. But especially with this guy, because it takes a lot of transparent base, I found, to really make your colors transparent. And if you want to play with transparency and overlapping colors and stuff like that, then you definitely want to add more of this than ink to your containers. So I'm gonna go ahead here and I'm gonna fill the majority of this container with some transparent base. Yeah. And then I'm gonna just like start by, I got blue all over me. I'm gonna start by dishing out some peacock blue here. And depending on how much ink you add versus how much transparent base you have, is of course going to affect the opacity. So if you don't want your color to be super transparent, then don't add as much transparent base. And if you want your colors to be really transparent, then you're going to add a bunch of transparent base. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this in together. And when you guys are mixing your colors, it definitely helps if you're going to use any bases or anything like that. It definitely helps to label your containers. That way you don't come back to this color maybe at some project later and you want like an opaque color and it ends up being like a really transparent color. So it definitely helps to like mark on your containers like this has, I don't know, like 80% transparent base in it, or this has like 30% extender base in it, you know? It'll definitely help you out. Okay, so I've got all my transparent base mixed up in there, and I'm gonna go ahead and swipe down on my paper here. Wow. So as you see there, it's like with just the spatula, it's like way more transparent than the other swipes that we have done. So yeah, the transparent base really does a lot to affect the opacity of your colors. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and swipe it through my screen. And as you see there, look, it's still, I don't know, it still looks pretty opaque. And I added, like, as you saw, a bunch of transparent base versus some ink. So yeah, you definitely, like I said, if you really want transparent colors, you definitely want to add a bunch more base and just a tiny bit of ink. I would start with a lot more base than ink, of course, and then you can add if it's too transparent, but you can't really take away if it's not transparent enough. So with just the swipe down, it looks like it's super transparent, but then I pulled it through the screen and it's not that transparent at all. So it definitely helps to swipe your inks through the screen before you go ahead and start printing. But yeah, so that is the gist on how to mix inks and the different bases for ink mixing. And then again, like, you can mix up your own colors if you want. You can play around with the different, you know, amounts of base versus ink or whatever. But yeah, so that is a little bit on how to mix inks for screen printing.